It is no longer news that Captain Ibrahim Traoré is now the most popular person in Africa. Not just that, even citizens of other countries would love for Captain Ibrahim Traoré to be president of their country. Isn't that right? Just a few days ago, the people of Ghana and even Ghana's new government put on a show of love and admiration for President Ibrahim Traoré. It was a powerful moment, especially considering how Western media often portrays him in a negative light. But Africans aren't fooled. They know the truth. The overwhelming support for Traoré isn't limited to the streets. It's echoed in the words of African leaders too. One notable voice is that of Rwanda's President Paul Kagame, who recently delivered a speech that not only supported the Sahel movement, but also revealed how deeply African political elites understand the root of these events. During his address, Kagame took a closer look at the recent wave of coups in the Sahel region. While Western narratives often claim these coups were nothing more than power grabs, Kagame presented a far more nuanced perspective. People have been talking about the coups happening across our continent, Kagame said. But coups are bound to happen in a place where so much is happening, and where the people are fed up with how things are going. And he's right. The Sahel countries have been grappling with immense challenges: rampant insecurity, economic stagnation, and corrupt governments. Many of these civilian governments were seen as puppets of the West, unable or unwilling to act in the best interest of their people. For instance, Traoré has been vocal about France's influence in Burkina Faso. He pointed out that the country's military, supposedly tasked with safeguarding its citizens, wasn't truly independent. Despite years of French military presence under the guise of fighting terrorism, the region became even more insecure. Kagame highlighted that the coups were a response to this deep frustration. The military leaders who seized power weren't outsiders. They were part of the same society, experiencing the same anger and disillusionment as ordinary citizens. Those who carry out the coups are a part of this society, Kagame said. They have experienced the same frustrations, resentment and anger, and a sense of justice. Some critics argue that coups are unconstitutional, but Kagame countered with a sharp observation: the constitutional systems failed first. Politicians came into power with grand promises, but their leadership often delivered nothing but disappointment. Meanwhile, citizens struggled to make ends meet as public funds were misused for personal luxuries and corrupt deals. Kagame didn't just analyze the past. He issued a challenge to the new military leaders in the Sahel. Those who have orchestrated the coups now have a task, he said. They must ensure they fulfill their pledges to the citizens who have supported them. They must give the people something better than what they had before. And Kagame didn't stop there. He expressed optimism, saying he sees signs of progress in the Sahel, where leaders like Traoré are working to turn frustration into meaningful change. Big changes are unfolding in the Sahel region, and they're shaking up the status quo in ways no one saw coming. Since the coups in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, these nations have taken bold steps that are already setting them apart from the Africa of old. For years, people have grown frustrated with civilian leaders who make grand promises but rarely deliver. Now, the military leaders in these countries are taking a different approach. From day one, they've positioned themselves as champions of Pan-African ideals and defenders of their nation's sovereignty, and their actions back up their words. One of their first and most surprising moves? Severing ties with France, the former colonial power that had long maintained a tight grip on these countries. This bold break sent shockwaves all the way to Paris. Even more interesting, it's inspiring other nations like Chad and Senegal to question their own relationships with France. But these leaders aren't stopping at symbolic gestures. They're tackling one of Africa's most persistent problems, the resource curse. For decades, African countries have been rich in resources like gold, uranium, and oil, yet they've remained among the poorest in the world. Why? Because these resources were often controlled by foreign companies that reaped massive profits while giving little back to the countries themselves. In Burkina Faso, for example, the government is nationalizing its gold industry. Instead of exporting raw gold at bargain prices, they've built a gold processing plant to ensure the country gets more value from its own resources. This shift not only boosts revenue but also creates local jobs and keeps wealth within the country. Meanwhile, Niger has taken a similar stand with its uranium mines. For decades, French company Orano dominated Niger's uranium industry, benefiting immensely while the country saw little in return. Now, Niger's leaders have reclaimed control, ensuring that their people will finally see the benefits of this critical resource. Mali is also making waves. Under the leadership of Colonel Assimi Goïta, the government is pushing for a fairer revenue-sharing model for its gold mines. The goal is clear: to ensure that the wealth generated from Mali's natural resources actually improves the lives of its citizens, instead of lining the pockets of foreign corporations and corrupt officials. If you are still watching this video, it means you love it, and you probably love what Traoré is doing to free Africa. Why not take out a second and hit that like button? Have you done that? Let us move on. These leaders have proven they're not just about making promises, they're about delivering results. In just a few short years, they've accomplished what civilian governments couldn't manage in nearly a decade of power. Rwandan President Paul Kagame didn't hold back in his critique of the West during a recent speech. His message was simple: Africa doesn't need lectures from outsiders. Africans need to reject lectures from the West, he said. Most times, the West is filled with confusion. We need to focus on what works for us and improves people's lives. His words hit home, especially for nations like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, which have started charting their own course. For decades, Western nations, particularly the United States and France, have interfered in other countries' affairs under the guise of helping. But history shows the devastation they often leave behind. Libya, Iraq, and Sudan are just a few examples where intervention led to chaos, instability, and suffering for ordinary people. France, in particular, has left a troubling legacy in Francophone Africa. Its policies and control over these nations have played a significant role in their poverty and underdevelopment. Kagame's message is clear. It's time for African countries to stop relying on Western advice and take ownership of their futures. He also pointed out the dangers of blindly following Western dictates. What's so bad, he said, is that you may follow their advice and end up ruining your country. Then they'll either blame you for the mess or offer to help you dig an even deeper hole. This statement rings painfully true. Western nations often push policies that on the surface seem like solutions but end up causing long-term harm. For instance, the structural adjustment programs promoted by the IMF and World Bank in exchange for loans have left lasting scars on African economies. These programs, which forced governments to cut spending on public services and privatize key industries, were supposed to stimulate growth. Instead, they deepened poverty and widened inequality. Even with evidence of the damage caused by these policies, Western institutions continue to promote them as the answer to Africa's problems. And to make matters worse, they often frame Africa's struggles as purely the result of bad governance, conveniently ignoring the role their own interventions have played. President Kagame's message is simple: African countries need to stop listening to the West's instructions and start creating their own path. And that's exactly what's happening in the Sahel. The military leaders in nations like Burkina Faso are breaking away from old alliances with Western powers and forging new relationships with non-Western allies. The results so far have been nothing short of remarkable. It's no surprise that Kagame, a leader known for his pragmatic and independent approach, became one of the first African leaders to collaborate with Captain Ibrahim Traoré after the coup. In November 2023, top military officials from Burkina Faso travelled to Rwanda to exchange ideas and strategies with their Rwandan counterparts. Their trip began with a visit to the Campaign Against Genocide Museum in Kigali, a powerful reminder of Rwanda's journey from unimaginable tragedy to resilience and recovery. The museum highlights how the Rwandan Patriotic Army led daring rescue missions during the genocide and ultimately defeated the forces responsible. This visit set the tone for their mission, learning from Rwanda's hard-earned experience. The Burkinabe delegation then met with Rwanda's Minister of Defense, Juvenal Marizamunda, and the Chief of Defense Staff, Lieutenant General M.K. Mubarak, to explore ways to strengthen cooperation between their military forces. They also toured Rwanda's military facilities, including welfare programs like Zigama CSS, a military savings and credit cooperative, and the Armed Forces Shop, which supports soldiers and their families. But the collaboration didn't stop there. Just a few weeks later, Burkina Faso's Inspector General of Police, Dr. Roger Ouedraogo, visited his Rwandan counterpart, Felix Namuhoranye, for a week-long bilateral meeting. The focus, building stronger policing relations and learning from Rwanda's success in community-centered security initiatives. Dr. Ouedraogo made it clear why they came to Rwanda. We have come to learn from Rwanda's policing, which is exemplary. We've witnessed how they involve the community in security matters and how this contributes to both security and development. This exchange underscores Captain Traoré's leadership style. He's not afraid to seek advice from countries that have faced similar challenges and succeeded. But why Rwanda? Why not other African powerhouses like Nigeria or Ghana? The answer lies in shared experiences. Both Rwanda and Burkina Faso have faced significant security crises that threatened their very survival. For Burkina Faso, the crisis stems from armed insurgent groups like Al-Qaeda, which have caused widespread violence and displacement. Rwanda, on the other hand, experienced one of the darkest chapters in modern history, the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. But under Kagame's leadership, Rwanda transformed its security landscape, rebuilt trust, and laid the foundation for sustainable development. It's easy to see why Traoré chose Rwanda as a mentor. Rwanda has already walked a similar path, overcoming incredible odds to achieve stability and growth. The partnership between the two countries feels like a younger sibling learning valuable lessons from an older one who has been through it all. So, did Ibrahim Traoré make the right choice by reaching out to Rwanda for collaboration? The short answer, absolutely. And here are 3 reasons why this move makes perfect sense. First off, Rwanda is a living example of recovery and rebuilding. When Paul Kagame took the reins in 2000, Rwanda was in ruins. The country had been shattered by a horrific genocide, sparked by deep-seated tensions between the Hutu and Tutsi communities. It all came to a head when a plane carrying 2 prominent Hutu presidents, Juvenal Habyarimana of Rwanda and Cyprien Ntaryamira of Burundi, was shot down near Kigali. That single event unleashed 100 days of unimaginable violence, leaving an estimated 800,000 Tutsi people dead. By the time Kagame stepped into leadership, Rwanda was in chaos. Institutions were broken, the population was traumatized, and the international community had all but turned a blind eye. Kagame had to rebuild the nation with limited resources, a team of guerrilla fighters and a few poorly trained cadres. Most experts doubted his chances. Yet more than 2 decades later, Rwanda is a completely different story. The country is stable, prosperous, and thriving. Maternal mortality rates have plummeted, healthcare has improved, and the streets are so safe that government ministers no longer require personal security. Rwanda has even become a hub for technology, earning a reputation as one of Africa's most efficient and innovative nations. If there's any country that demonstrates how to rise from the ashes, it's Rwanda. Captain Traoré understands this, which is why he's wisely building ties with Kagame's administration. Second, strong leadership is essential, and Rwanda is proof of that. One thing you'll notice when people talk about Kagame is how often they describe him as decisive, even authoritarian. For some, this might sound like a negative trait, especially for those who prioritize Western ideals of democracy and press freedom. But Kagame's leadership style is exactly what Rwanda needed. Imagine trying to rebuild a nation where the very people responsible for the genocide must live side by side with the survivors. Reconciliation wasn't just a challenge, it was a necessity. Kagame took a firm approach, ensuring that everyone, both victims and perpetrators, focused on a shared goal: rebuilding their communities and their country. His methods may not have been popular with everyone, but his results speak volumes. Critics have accused Kagame of stifling opposition, curbing press freedom, and changing the constitution to extend his presidency. But here's the thing. His leadership style wasn't about personal gain. It was about ensuring Rwanda stayed on track, avoiding the pitfalls that could easily have sent the country spiraling back into chaos. Let's get one thing straight. Kagame didn't force his way into extended leadership. It was the people of Rwanda who changed the constitution, showing their trust and approval of his leadership. Isn't that what democracy is really about? Letting the people decide who they want to lead them. For Burkina Faso to rise from its challenges, it needs strong and decisive leadership, the kind that doesn't just make promises but delivers results. Ibrahim Traoré has already shown potential as a bold leader, but teaming up with Rwanda could take his vision to the next level. Now, why is a partnership between Burkina Faso and Rwanda such a big deal? First, because it's an African collaboration. History has shown us what happens when African nations work against each other. Colonization is a prime example. Instead of uniting, tribes and kingdoms often sold each other out, making it easier for European powers to dominate the continent. The West learned from this and ensured Africa stayed divided by carving it into colonies, which later became independent countries with artificial borders. While we can't undo the past, we can shape the future. and that means strengthening partnerships within Africa itself. When African countries collaborate, they're one step closer to a more united continent. A partnership between Rwanda and Burkina Faso sends a powerful message. African nations can stand together, support one another, and solve their own problems. For instance, if Burkina Faso needs help combating jihadists, a strong ally like Rwanda is more likely to step in. This kind of unity is especially important because institutions like the African Union and ECOWAS have often fallen short. Ideally, these organizations would rally nations together to tackle common issues like armed insurgencies. Instead, they've become symbolic, failing to take real action when it matters most. But Traoré isn't waiting around for help that might never come. By building relationships with countries like Rwanda, he's showing that Africa's future depends on Africans coming together, sharing ideas, and supporting one another. At the end of the day, Africa's problems won't be solved by outsiders. It's up to African leaders to create solutions that work for their people, and partnerships like this one are a step in the right direction. Was this an interesting watch for you? What do you think about the partnership between Captain Ibrahim Traoré and Paul Kagame of Rwanda? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.